the end. Tonight we're going to talk about Nuada, the first High King of Ireland. I really like this figure. He's been depicted many different ways in popular culture, say movies, things like that. So it's very interesting. My favorite depiction probably is from Hellboy. His depiction there is what I kind of envision the Fae to look like. And the depiction of his father being more a very obvious wood spirit with the antler tree type and becoming wood when he died. Things like that. I thought that was very interesting the way they portrayed it. But we're going to talk a little bit about his story. Now, Nuada is known for having a silver arm, a magical sword, and Tuatha De Danann were among many invaders and immigrants who came to Ireland. They are not known to be the original Irish, but some actually consider it possible that it is from the tribe of Dan, from the Hebrews, that there was actually a group from the tribe of Dan that left Egypt before the Great Exodus, that they left just on their own and become seafaring, great seafaring people, and that they actually are the ones who were the Tuatha De Danann, and that's who they are. And others say that the name represents people of the goddess Danu. Don't know. Interesting. But most stories do say that they came and conquered in Ireland. So they weren't the original inhabitants. Nuada was the first High King of the Tuatha De Danann. He reigned for 7 years before the Tuatha De Danann decided to move to Ireland and leave their mystical lands. Nuada was a just and powerful king, and he had a powerful sword that could defeat any enemy once drawn. And his full title means Nuada of the Silver Hand. This title relates to the sad loss of his hand in one of the battles for conquering Ireland. Nuada was a good and just ruler, and he also followed the rules that he set for his people. A part of his power came from the fact that he had one of the 4 treasures of the Tuatha De Danann, a sword, the sword of Nuada. Nuada's sword, when unsheathed, could defeat any enemy. It says that, that's where he lives. I can't pronounce it. Boyne. I'm not familiar with the Irish pronunciation, so I'm not able to get that right. But he later lost this to the Dagda, who became chief of the Tuatha De Danann. Nuada was married to Boann, a river goddess, but it was an unhappy union and it produced no children. They decided to divorce, and later Nuada passed his kingdom to a man named Breath on the Emerald Isle. But this was a bad idea. He wanted to take the island from the Firbolg and the Fomorians who occupied it. So then they had their first battle, Moytura. The fight to control Ireland took place in 2 battles. The first one took place at Cog against the Firbolg. The Tuatha De Danann fought bravely, and they won against this first group of people. But it came at a price. Even though they were victorious, King Nuada lost his hand. It was taken by one of the Firbolg warriors named Sureg. While it was a tragedy, it normally would mean nothing for the status of a king, but not in this case. Nuada was a rule follower. He had written the rule of kings, and the king of his people must be physically and wholly intact. So after he lost his hand, he could no longer legally be king, and he would have to abdicate. He even rewarded the Furbolg warrior who had taken his hand and gave him a piece of land on which to rule. After he knew he could no longer be king, he gave his throne to a man named Brest. Then they made him a silver hand. That's why he's known as Nuada of the Silver Hand. He had a metal hand, a prosthesis. But then came the second battle, because while Brest was connected with the Tuatha De Danann and married to the goddess Bridget, he was half Fomorian. So once the battle began, the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians began. Brest joined the Fomorian side, and the Tuatha De Danann were defeated. He enslaved them for many years. During this time, Nuada was enraged about the choice he had made for his successor. So he made plans to reclaim his throne. With the help of his two brothers, a healer and a god of smith, he was able to get a new hand. But by this time it was made of silver. Because he had a silver hand, he was able to get back his throne as king. Even later, he used magic to produce himself a flesh hand. So Nuada reclaimed the title as king after they were able to overthrow Brest. They celebrated their victory, and they had not yet fought the Fomorians to take claim of Ireland. But they had not yet. During the celebration, a young man named Lugh came to Nuada to present himself. He offered his services. Nuada agreed and asked Lugh to create a battle plan to help defeat the Fomorians. But Nuada secretly knew that Lugh was half Fomorian. He was also the grandson of the infamous Balor of the Evil Eye. Lugh was prophesied to kill his grandfather, and so Nuada needed him as part of their force. In battle, it worked. Lugh killed his grandfather, but not before Balor of the Evil Eye cut off Nuada's head. Despite that, the Fomorians were defeated. So the Tuatha De Danann gained the Emerald Isle, and Lugh became the next king. And he was just the kind of ruler that Nuada had been. So that's good. That means he was a just ruler. Okay, so that's the story of Nuada. Most of these stories seem to have tragic endings. But that's what's interesting about these mythical, some people call them gods, but they seem quite mortal for gods. And they can have body parts cut off, like losing a hand or whatever, so they seem to have very human traits. They weren't these unbelievable characters. They had human flaws, was in a bad marriage, got divorced, things like that. So these characters are interesting. And if you're one of the ones who follows the idea that they were a group that came from the tribe of Dan, they would be perfectly normal mortal people, and these stories just, get a little bit more and more over time, and they become these immortalized figures when really they were just normal people, possibly. But also, there is another possibility, because when you talk about the tribe of the Tuatha De Danann, they say they come from another realm. And this is interesting because of the stories of the half sky deity, half human kind of beings. In many cultures and traditions, there are demigods, half human and half something else, including the Hebrew account in Genesis 6 of the angelic race, which were a race that I consider shapeshifters based on what I've read. They could be spirit, or they could manifest in flesh forms, and possibly just choose what form to manifest in. And in Genesis 6, they chose to manifest in human form and take wives, and actually, because they wanted to produce children, they wanted to have offspring, but it was not meant to be. So these demigods, as that story says, were men of renown, the kings of old, the heroes of old. And so that would fit a lot of these myths and tales where these people seem to be little more than human, but still could be wounded, still could be killed, but had extremely long lives. It all fits with that tale. So, but that's a big spider web we won't tackle tonight. But yeah, that is the story of Nuada. And like I said, I really I like the portrayal in Hellboy of Prince Nuada. Now, the character doesn't really match the Irish folktale as far as, anything about it. Just maybe just use the same name. But as far as the way he looks, I really like that depiction, because when you talk about the Fae folk, the Tuatha De Danann, if they're considered Fae folk, they're considered gray folk. So you think of them as being very pale. And that's kind of the way I would look at them. So I think that's interesting. But that's the end of the story for tonight. And I hope you will join us. This is Sunday, so I hope you'll join us back Wednesday for the book club. It's interesting because some of the characters in the book we're going through, Hounded, the Iron Druid Chronicles, they have characters. They have Brass, they have Bridget, they have some of these Celtic myth characters in the story. So it's kind of interesting to go along. They don't have a Nuada in that book, but they do have Brass and Bridget. So join us for the book club, and I appreciate you hanging out with me, and I will see you later.